Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today for our chapter book story time. I am at my home rather than at the Caribou Public Library today. Not being able to come into work for a couple of weeks, decided it was time to do some recording from home instead of waiting until I was able to be back at the library. So here we are. We're going to continue to read in Little Women. I'm on chapter 33, and this chapter is called Joe's Journal. So we'll continue here and see what happens next. Dear Marmee and Beth, I'm going to write you a regular volume, for I've got heaps to tell you, though I'm not a fine young lady traveling on the continent. When I lost sight of Father's dear old face, I felt a trifle blue, and might have shed a briny drop or two if an Irish lady with 4 small children, all crying more or less, hadn't diverted my mind. For I amused myself by dropping gingerbread nuts over the seat every time they opened their mouths to roar. Soon the sun came out, and taking it as a good omen, I cleared up likewise, and enjoyed my journey with all my heart. Mrs. Kirke welcomed me so kindly, I felt at home at once, even in that big house full of strangers. She gave me a funny little sky parlor, all she had, but there is a stove in it, and a nice table in a sunny window, so I can sit here and write whenever I like. A fine view and a church tower opposite atoned for the many stairs, and I took a fancy to my den on the spot. The nursery, where I am to teach and sew, is a pleasant room next Mrs. Kirke's private parlor, and the 2 little girls are pretty children, rather spoiled, I fancy, but they took to me after telling them the 7 bad pigs, and I've no doubt I shall make a model governess. I am to have my meals with the children, if I prefer it to the great table, and for the present I do, for I am bashful, though no one will believe it. Now, my dear, make yourself at home, said Mrs. K, in her motherly way. I'm on the drive from morning till night, as you may suppose with such a family, but a great anxiety will be off my mind if I know the children are safe with you. My rooms are always open to you, and your own shall be as comfortable as I can make it. There are some pleasant people in the house if you feel sociable, and your evenings are always free. Come to me if anything goes wrong, and be as happy as you can. There's the tea bell. I must run and change my cap. And off she bustled, leaving me to settle myself in my new nest. As I went downstairs soon after, I saw something I liked. The flights are very long in this tall house, and as I stood waiting at the head of the 3rd one for a little servant girl to lumber up, I saw a gentleman come along behind her, take the heavy hod of coal out of her hand, carry it all the way up, put it down at the door near by, and walk away, saying, with a kind nod and a foreign accent, "It goes better so. The little back is too young for half such heaviness." Wasn't it good of him? I like such things, for, as Father says, trifles show character. When I mentioned it to Mrs. K that evening, she laughed and said, "That must have been Professor Bhaer. He's always doing things of that sort." Mrs. K told me that he was from Berlin, very learned and good, but poor as a church mouse, and gives lessons to support himself and 2 little orphan nephews, whom he's educating here according to the wishes of his sister, who married an American. Not a very romantic story, but it interested me, and I was glad to hear that Mrs. K lends him her parlor for some of his scholars. There is a glass door between it and the nursery, and I mean to peep at him, and then I'll tell you how he looks. He's almost 40, so it's no harm, Marmee. After tea and a go-to-bed romp with the little girls, I attacked the big work basket and had a quiet evening with my new friend. I shall keep a journal letter and send it once a week. So good night, and more tomorrow. Tuesday evening. Had a lovely time in my seminary this morning, for the children acted like Sancho, and at one time I really thought I should shake them all around. Some good angel inspired me to try gymnastics, and I kept it up until they were glad to sit down and keep still. After luncheon, the girl took them out for a walk, and I went to my needlework, like little Mabel, with a willing mind. I was thanking my stars that I had learned to make nice buttonholes, when the parlor door opened and shut and someone began to hum. Canst thou thus land like a big bumblebee? It was dreadfully improper, I know, but I couldn't resist the temptation, and lifting one end of the curtain before the glass door, I peeped in. Professor Bhaer was there, and while he arranged his books, I took a good look at him. A regular German, rather stout, with brown hair tumbled all over his head, a bushy beard, good nose, the kindest eyes I ever saw, and a splendid big voice that does one's ears good, after our sharp or slipshod American gabble. His clothes were rusty, his hands were large, and he hadn't a really handsome feature in his face, except his beautiful teeth. Yet I liked him, for he had a fine head. His linen was very nice, and he looked like a gentleman, though 2 buttons were off of his coat, and there was a patch on one shoe. He looked sober in spite of his humming, till he went to the window to turn the hyacinth bulbs toward the sun, and stroke the cat, who received him like an old friend. Then he smiled, when a tap came at the door, called out in a loud, brisk tone, "Erin!" I was just going to run, when I caught sight of a morsel of a child carrying a big book, and stopped to see what was going on. "Me wants my Bhaer," said the mite, slamming down her book and running to meet him. "Thou shalt have thy Bhaer. Come, then, and take a good hug from him, my Tina," said the professor, catching her up with a laugh and holding her so high over his head that she had to stoop her little face to kiss him. "Now me must study my lesson," went on the funny little thing. So he put her up at the table, opened a great dictionary she had brought, and gave her a paper and pencil, and she scribbled away, turning a leaf now and then and passing her little fat finger down the page, as if finding a word, so soberly that I nearly betrayed myself by a laugh, while Mr. Bhaer stood stroking her pretty hair with a fatherly look that made me think she must be his own, though she looked more French than German. Another knock and the appearance of 2 young ladies sent me back to my work, and there I virtuously remained through all the noise and gabbling that went on next door. One of the girls kept laughing affectedly and saying, "Now, Professor," in a coquettish tone, and the other pronounced her German with an accent that must have made it hard for him to keep sober. Both seemed to try his patience sorely, for more than once I heard him say emphatically, "No, no, it is not so. You have not listened to what I say." And once there was a loud rap, as if he struck the table with his book, followed by the despairing exclamation, "Prut, it all goes bad this day." Poor man, I pitied him, and when the girls were gone, took just one more peep to see if he survived it. He seemed to have thrown himself back in his chair, tired out, and there sat with his eyes shut until the clock struck 2, when he jumped up, put his books in his pocket, as if ready for another lesson, and, taking little Tina, who had fallen asleep on the sofa, in his arms, he carried her quietly away. I fancy he has a hard life of it. Mrs. Kirke asked me if I wouldn't go down to the 5 o'clock dinner, and feeling a little bit homesick, I thought that I would, just to see what sort of people are under the same roof with me. So I made myself respectable, and tried to slip in behind Mrs. Kirke. But as she is short, and I'm tall, my efforts at concealment were rather a failure. She gave me a seat by her, and after my face had cooled off, I plucked up the courage and looked about me. The long table was full, and everyone intent on getting their dinner, the gentlemen especially, who seemed to be eating on time, for they bolted every sense of the word, vanishing as soon as they were done. There was the usual assortment of young men, absorbed in themselves, young couples absorbed in each other, married ladies in their babies, and old gentlemen in politics. I don't think I shall care to have much to do with any of them, except one sweet-faced maiden lady who looks as if she had something in her. Cast away at the very bottom of the table was the professor, shouting answers to the questions of a very inquisitive, deaf old gentleman on one side, and talking philosophy with a Frenchman on the other. If Amy had been here, she'd have turned her back on him forever, because, so sad to relate, he had a great appetite, and shovelled in his dinner in a manner which would have horrified her ladyship. I didn't mind, for I like to see folks eat with a relish, as Hannah says, and the poor man must have needed a deal of food after teaching idiots all day. As I went upstairs after dinner, two of the young men were settling their hats before a hall mirror, and I heard one say low to the other, "Who's the new party?" "Governess, or something of that sort." "What the deuce is she at our table for?" "Friend of the old lady's." "Handsome head, but no style." "Not a bit of it. Give us a light and come on." I felt angry at first, and then I didn't care, for governess is as good as a clerk, and I've got sense if I haven't style, which is more than some people have, judging from the remarks of the elegant beings who clattered away, smoking like bad chimneys. I hate ordinary people. Yesterday was a quiet day. This is now Thursday. Yesterday was a quiet day, spent in teaching, sewing, and writing in my little room, which is very cozy, with a light and fire. I picked up a few bits of news, and was introduced to the professor. It seems that Tina is the child of the Frenchwoman who does the fine ironing and the laundry there. The little thing has lost her heart to Mr. Bhaer, and follows him about the house like a dog whenever he is at home, which delights him, as he is very fond of children, though a bachelor. Kitty and Minnie Kirke likewise regard him with affection, and tell all sorts of stories about the plays he invents, and the presents he brings, and the splendid tales he tells. The young men quiz him, it seems, call him Old Fritz, Lager Beer, Ursa Major, and make all manners of jokes on his name. But he enjoys it like a boy, Mrs. K says, and takes it so good-naturedly that they all like him, in spite of his foreign ways. The maiden lady is a Miss Norton, rich, cultivated, and kind. She spoke to me at dinner today, for I went to table again, it's such fun to watch people, and asked me to come and see her at her room. She has fine books and pictures, knows interesting persons, and seems friendly, so I shall make myself agreeable, for if I do want to get into good society, only it isn't the same sort that Amy likes. You do want to get into good society. I was in our parlor that last evening, when Mr. Bhaer came in with some newspapers from Mrs. Kirke. Newspapers for Mrs. Kirke. She wasn't there, but Minnie, who is a little old woman, introduced me very prettily. "This is Mamma's friend, Miss March." "Yes, and she's jolly, and we like her lots," added Kitty, who is an enfant terrible. We both bowed, and then we laughed, for the prim introduction and the blunt addition were rather a comical contrast. Yes, I hear these naughty ones go to vex you, Miss March, and if so again, call me and I come," he said, with a threatening frown that delighted the little wretches. I promised I would, and he departed, but it seems as if I was doomed to see a great deal of him, for today, as I passed his door on my way out, by accident I knocked against it with my umbrella. It flew open, and there he stood in his dressing gown with a big blue sock in one hand and a darning needle in the other. He didn't seem at all ashamed of it, for when I explained and hurried on, he waved his hand, sock and all, saying in his loud, cheerful way, "You have a fine day and make your walk. Bon voyage, mademoiselle." I laughed all the way downstairs, but it was a little pathetic also to think of a poor man having to mend his own clothes. The German gentlemen embroider, I know, but darning hose is another thing, and not so pretty. Saturday. Nothing has happened to write about except a call on Miss Norton, who has a room full of lovely things, and who is very charming, for she showed me all her treasures, and asked me if I would sometimes go with her to lectures and concerts as her escort, if I enjoyed them. She put it as a favor, but I'm sure Mrs. Kirke told her about us, and she does it out of kindness to me. I'm as proud as Lucifer, but such favors from such people don't burden me, and I accepted gratefully. When I got back to the nursery, there was such an uproar in the parlor that I looked in. There was Mr. Bhaer down on his hands and knees with Tina on his back, Kitty leading him with a jump rope, and Minnie feeding two small boys with seed cakes, as they roared and ramped in cages built of chairs. "We are playing Nargerie," explained Kitty. "This is mine affluent," added Tina, holding on by the professor's hair. Must have meant elephant, right? "Mamma always allows us to do what we like Saturday afternoons, when Franz and Emil come, doesn't she, Mr. Bhaer?" said Minnie. The elephant sat up, looking as much in earnest as any of them, and said soberly to me, I give you my word it is so. If we make too large a noise, you shall say hush to us, and we go more softly. I promised to do so, but left the door open, and enjoyed the fun as much as they did, for a more glorious frolic I never witnessed. They played tag and soldiers, danced and sung, and when it began to grow dark, they all piled onto the sofa about the professor, while he told charming fairy tales of the storks on the chimney tops and the little kobolds who ride the snowflakes as they fall. I wish Americans were as simple and natural as Germans, don't you? I'm so fond of writing, I should go spinning on forever if motives of economy didn't stop me. For though I've used thin paper and written fine, I tremble to think of the stamps this long letter will need. Pray forward Amy's as soon as you can spare them. My small news will sound very flat after her splendors, but you will like them, I know. Is Teddy studying so hard that he can't find time to write to his friends? Take good care of him for me, Beth, and tell me about the babies, and give heaps of love to everyone. From your faithful, Joe. P.S. On reading over my letter, it strikes me as rather Bhaery, but I am always interested in odd people, and I really had nothing else to write about. Bless you. Well, that's it for today. We'll continue on with the rest of the chapter next time. See you then.